Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Volunteer Technologist podcast. Here we take a look at the different ways that people who are technically inclined volunteer outside of their primary job. Today, I'm joined by Dimitri Tarassenko. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Gian. Thank you very much.
Appreciate you taking the time to join me. I was wondering if you would take a brief moment and kind of introduce yourself and maybe give us an idea of what we're going to talk about today.
Thank you. So, first of all, that's my first time being on any podcast ever. So, I appreciate the invite. I am a software engineer by training and by my main profession. I'm at the what I would call the pinnacle of my career right now because it's been a while. I've been in the industry for quite a bit. And at different points in my life, I did various volunteer jobs that were technology related. The one that Gene got interested in was the volunteering work that I do for two conventions in Atlanta area, the Dragon Con and the MomoCon. So that's how our conversation got started, and that's I think what we're gonna talk about today.
Yeah, that does sound pretty interesting. So just to kind of set the stage, can you kind of give me the layman's version of what those conferences are and kind of what kind of scale they are?
They're called multi-genre pop culture conventions, both of them. And this is, Dragon Con is the larger one of the two shows that I volunteer for. This is, think of Comic-Con on a slightly smaller scale. So you get 85,000 people, not 120,000 people. And it happens yearly in Atlanta during the Labor Day weekend. So this is around first weekend of September or so.
So a pretty good sized conference.
It is. If you've ever been to Atlanta downtown during that time, you probably know what I'm talking about because we basically take over the downtown, and it's multi-genre. So it means that people from different fandoms and people who are interested in different things about pop culture gather together and spend wonderful 5 days partying and exchanging ideas and listening to people in the industry and whatnot. So Dragon Con is a little bit more geared towards literature, fan fiction, board gaming, and television. And MomoCon is sort of a smaller convention that happens at the Georgia Wood Congress Center, not the 5 hotels that the Dragon Con is at. And it's approximately half the size, maybe a little bit bigger. And that is catering to a little bit younger crowd, and this is more focused on the animation, primarily Japanese animation and gaming. So, as in video games and things of that nature.
Cool. So, what is it that you're doing for Dragon Con, and is it just a team of like you, or is there a whole bunch of people, or like what's that kind of look like? Because that's a pretty big conference. I imagine there's a lot of tech behind the scenes going on there.
Well, that's exactly right, Jin, and that is one thing that is sort of sets the Dragon Con apart from similar events that might happen in New York or San Diego that you might have heard of. The Comic-Con conventions are run by a commercial organization, and most people who make these huge things happen are sort of hired professionals. And Dragon Con is almost entirely volunteer run. We're talking about a volunteer organization that is 2,000 people. And most of these 2,000 contribute about 25 hours of their time during the convention, doing certain things. There are people who spend more time doing this, and there are people who kind of work on this year round, preparing for different things. And that is, of course, kind of like much smaller group, but this is a very kind of close-knit community that actually overlaps with other conventions that some of the same people are doing. And as any organization of that size, right, it's got its own structure, it's got management structure, it's got different divisions that are focused on different tasks. So if you're a law enforcement officer and you want to volunteer for Dragon Con, there's the entire safety department that deals with these issues. If you're a doctor, there's place for that. If you're an advertising professional, there's a marketing division. So it's a once a year it becomes a very big kind of corporate structure with all the ins and outs of it. including the IT department and sort of similar things. My place in that organization is in the kind of video processing and streaming department. So the part of technology that I help with is the streaming presence for both conventions, and that is kind of buried in what's called the operations group, which is a group of volunteers that deal with audiovisual aspects of technology there. So this is where you go watch an event, or you go to see a panel of some sort, and volunteers are running the audio boards, and volunteers are running the cameras there that you see basically the picture on the larger projection screens, because some of these panels are for 1,700 2,000 people, right? So it becomes a media operation of its sort, with sort of a small TV production that might be anywhere from 2 to a 4 camera shoot, with sort of a larger audio boards, a bunch of mics in it, and everything else. And a lot of these events are being first of all streamed, right? So there's a kind of a streaming technology component to it, and even bigger portion of that gets recorded and then is used in social presence for these conventions, and goes on YouTube for people who may not have been able to attend the convention or a particular event. Like if you wanted to get into one of 2 panels that was going at the same time, and you happen to have your favorite actors in both of them, you go to one and then you watch another one on YouTube or Dragon Con TV, as it may, right? So Dragon Con is a larger convention. It has its own TV channel that we kind of stand up on Wednesday before the convention starts, and we broadcast for 5 to 6 days, all the way until Monday. It is a 24/7 TV station for all intents and purposes, that has its own kind of ad breaks. It has a lot of live events when we broadcast live panels, and the Dragon Con parade that happens on Saturday morning, when the Atlanta Peachtree Street is shut down for thousands of people that demonstrate their cosplay. There are concerts. There's a bunch of live events that go on that constitute most of this TV channel experience. And there's a news division that goes and shoots interviews. So think of if you had a small 80,000 people town that appeared out of nowhere for 5 days, and that town had a TV station. A lot of small towns like that have their own TV station. So I'm working at a TV station that's like that appears for 5 days every year, and then disappears, right? And I run the technology group that basically is doing what's called an industry master control, which is the operation that takes live feeds and pre-recorded content and assembles it all into a sort of a linear channel, a channel of television that people watch. And then, this is not just going to streaming. If you're staying at one of the convention hotels in downtown Atlanta, you get that channel on your in-room cable TV. So it has become a thing because it's been going on for 20 years now. So this is the Dragon Con TV is part of the convention experience for a lot of people who come year after year after year. The year before last was our 20th anniversary, and we did a lot of graphics and showed a lot of content that was produced almost 20 years ago. So I had some 3x4 interlaced videos to take care of. It was its own kind of interesting thing. But that's what it is with Dragon Con. MomoCon is kind of a smaller operation that is very Twitch centric. It's more geared towards kind of streaming audience, and because a lot of this is about gaming, their primary platform is Twitch. So for me, it's a simpler operation that is using a lot of the same technology we used during Dragon. But what's important is that kind of core volunteer group that makes it all happen. And at one convention, 70 to 80% of the people in the same group are doing other conventions as well. So over time, I used to do Dragon Con only, and then I realized that I missed some of the friends that I would only see once a year. I decided to go and see them twice a year, even though, MomoCon crowd is a lot younger than I am. And, I stick out there as one of the few people with gray hair. But it's okay. It's a lot of fun nonetheless.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to wrap my mind around a 2,000 person volunteer organization, given that the first software company I worked for was 10 years old and had 500 people in the whole company, and we were a global company. We got bought by another global company, and the entire company, I think, barely didn't even make it all the way to 2,000 people. And I think the company that we're working for today is 250-ish people.
That's
And
true.
so,
Yeah.
like, just thinking about that, it's like, okay, got entire companies, including some that are like 10 and 15 years old or more. And we're talking, 2 to 4 times the size of those in a volunteer force to run just
Mhm.
the volunteer side of the conference. That's just kind of, for a scale perspective, that's just kind of amazing.
You're exactly right. That's a unique thing. So, first of all, they had a little bit of time because Dragon Con is going to be 37 years old next
Wow.
time. It is run now by a daughter of one of the founders,
Oh,
right?
wow.
So he's still around, but he's retired, and his daughter Rachel Reeves runs it now, right? So, and I work alongside some of the people whose parents kind of started this, and now they are the volunteers. So
That's really cool.
it's really cool because like there's a lot of people who stuck along for that long. We have several volunteer meetings or orientation meetings that are usually happening in the spring, which is where we do kind of our recruitment. Like if you want to be a volunteer for Dragon Con, you show up to one of those. You go and talk to people, and they tell you what jobs are available, and you try to figure out your place in there, right? But it's usually a gathering of kind of a bunch of people you haven't seen for half a year. And one of the things that the organization is doing during this time is, um, in your anniversary years, you get a pin, right? So I got my like 5 year pin, right? And then there's a whole part of the ceremony that
Hmm.
actually takes a long time when they're distributing these pins, and
Yeah, I bet.
so there's like a 5 year pin, there's 10 year pin, there's I have a friend that I work with that's got a 25-year pin,
Wow.
a 25-year pin, a couple of years ago. So it would be his 27th or so. He's a really cool guy, but people tend to stick for quite a while, and sometimes they take breaks because they move away, can't attend this and that. The COVID year was a very kind of different experience for everybody, of course, because it all went virtual, right? There was nothing happening.
Yeah.
And then kind of the 2 years that it took the convention to recover from COVID. But that's, I attribute it to the fact that like I'm probably in the minority that ends up doing things for Dragon Con that are close to their day job. And I'm not like this is not even 100% because I'm not a master control room operator or a video engineer my day job. I'm a software engineer that just happens to design and write software for television. So kind of I know these processes, but I know them not because this is my kind of day job, right? I know them because my day job is creating tools for people that work in this industry, right?
So, what is it that a normal round of volunteering at Dragon Con actually has you doing?
Uh, I mainly train people to do their job, basically to do the quality control for the video that they're taking in. I pick technologies that we're using, so the streaming services and various pieces of equipment sometimes that are used in the process. I create kind of operational procedure for these for the people that actually do the job, and then I'm around answering questions and helping them if they have any problems. It sounds like I'm not doing much during the convention, but I'm usually 35 to 40,000 steps on my uh, on my watch every day during that because you're running from sort of one place to another, and there's a lot of stuff happening. So it's pretty strenuous physically as well. But that's kind of that's my job. Most of the volunteers, depending on what you do for the operation, in if you're working in kind of television or broadcast, as we call it, there are jobs where people show up and do camera work. People show up and do production switcher work where they kind of switch in between the cameras and graphics and create this experience that you see on the what's called in-venue projection screen, the larger screen that you see in some some of these panels. There's audio work where like you work with microphones and audio boards and what's that. So think of a media production company, right? Just not unlike a division of the company that you and I work for
Yeah.
that does production for sports, except like this one is think of it's doing production for an event, and one of the event happens to be the parade when we actually like. This year was pretty cool because we did get a license from Atlanta Police Department to operate a drone during the parade.
Nice.
So we had one of our guys, fly the drone, and one of our cameras was the drone feed from up top. We had some complaints about that because we have one of the floats in the parade that's very popular is this huge desert ship manned by Jawas in Star Wars, and they're like group of people who dress up like Jawas with their brown suits and everything, and this thing looks awesome because it looks just like a Star Wars ship. And we actually aired a shot of that contraption from up above, and it was obvious to everybody that they basically took a school bus and kind of framed it with panels on the outside, and up until now nobody knew what was inside this thing. So that was interesting. But it's like people running around with kind of mobile cameras. They're not always mounted, so you get to play television engineer and you get to play television operator for a day. Like I said, most of the people that I work with, they're sort of like myself, tangentially related to this, or they they went through film school but ended up working and doing something else, or they wanted to go to film school but went and did something else. But it creates this kind of environment where you can go and try doing something that you don't normally do in your day life for about 5 days, and a lot of people find it very, very attractive enough to, I don't know, spend $1,000 on a hotel to stay there, or spend another $1,000 to fly in and out, because it's not just local people. It's not just Southeast. I had volunteers who flew down from St. Paul, for example. Right, one of the ladies that worked in my division. She had a friend here who told her about this. So she was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna fly in," and it's a very decent portion of both attendees and volunteers that do that.
How many simultaneous different broadcasts would you say that are running during a given day of the conference? And I think of a broadcast as being like a given presentation or basically a given set of cameras, that are focused on a common subject.
So during Dragon, we do production where like there's a camera switching, right, in 4 or 5 different rooms, right. There are smaller rooms where it's just recording, and sometimes it's just a single camera. And we usually pick the most interesting event out of these, where we can get the signal depending on the year and the agreement with the hotel. It's usually we get 2 or 3 different sources. So I get a pick of like which event to pick, but it's really not my pick. We kind of compile the schedule ahead of time, trying to figure out, because there's some aspects where if we have, for example, a very interesting panel, but there is an actor from BBC, right? BBC has streaming rights for everything that these guys do, so like we can't follow that. We follow something else. But it's generally that setup. I get a pick from 2-3 different sources, depending on what's going on, which are live, and sometimes nothing is that interesting, or we have this BBC blackout and we play kind of pre-recorded material that might have happened at other time. But it's usually anywhere from 4 to 5 to 6 rooms that have this setup, and the ones that don't broadcast live or don't stream, they usually record things, and then that is used later in the library that builds up at DragonCon.tv, shameless plug, where we actually sell streaming subscriptions to people, which is $10 a year. It gets you access to all the live content during the convention, and then the library of content that was accumulated. Like we usually produce about a 100 plus hours of content every year that goes into that library, and then a lot of people try to catch up on the events that they missed. They missed that way. When I train people on master control and kind of the jobs that we have them do at Dragon Con TV, I usually tell them, well, if you're asking yourself how many people are watching, because like this is not Twitch, you don't see a counter, right?
Yeah.
Of like how many people are watching your feed. Think of it this way: you've got about 2,500 rooms where this is going into. You've got anywhere from 50 to 500 people who are streaming it online. So think in terms of like you're showing it to a couple of hundred people if it's a very popular panel, if it's so somebody from like Star Trek, for example. Like um, we usually have a few very kind of well known personalities every year. This grows to a couple of thousand, right?
Yeah.
If you're doing it in the middle of the night, people are usually partying. They have your content in the room, but it's like that's a background kind of noise to whatever they're doing. But that's that. MomoCon is kind of done differently because we do 4 simultaneous live streams to Twitch from different panels. And we do a fifth one, which is sort of a highlights where we pick the one that's most interesting. And that one stays on for, 24/7, right? The other four are kind of event based where they're being started and stopped as things are happening in, they call main rooms or larger rooms that usually things that hold 700 plus people in terms of audience size. Those are the ones that we use for streaming.
You had mentioned obviously the conferences are very different in size, and MomoCon does a little more focus on the live streaming. How is the work you have to do and the technology stack or the equipment that gets used and processes that get used? How are those different between or the same between the two conferences?
There's a lot of overuse. They actually share equipment and kind of, I don't know organizationally how that happens, but a lot of equipment that's owned by MomoCon technically is used by Dragon and kind of vice versa in a lot of ways because it's a lot of the same people are doing both the same things. But we finally got it to a point 3 years ago when we agreed on the video format because Dragon was 720p and Momo was 1080, right? So like every 6 months we had to get all the equipment and switch all the cameras, switch all the production switchers between that format and this format. So we kind of caught up, and now it's 1080p 5994 throughout for both of them. That's kind of the house standard for both, and there's a lot more synergy, a lot more reuse right now between the two worlds. But it's mainly driven by the fact that I have the in-house hotel cable systems to target during Dragon, right? Which is I have SDI workflows. I have all of this kind of it's extremely convoluted because some of these systems, some of the in-house cable systems that do cable TV in the hotels are very old as well. So we're producing everything in nice and shiny 1080p, and then a couple of hotels are still running standard definition setups. So all of this, like crispy and colorful picture that I get from the parade, for example, with all of these colorful costumes and wonderful people, I squeeze it all the way back down to standard definition format for some of these. So that's that set of complexities. And MomoCon is a lot more kind of in the digital world where it's just streaming. It goes kind of straight to Twitch, and I think this year we're going to do other platforms as well, which is going to be the first. But that's probably the only difference. And I need fewer people for Momo because it doesn't have its news division. So there's like people don't do editing. I'm not in that world. I don't edit, but like I get the result of their work, and this
Yeah.
is that kind of stuff. But that's basically a difference.
You're talking about the news divisions. I meant to follow up on that a minute ago. Is it like studio kind of news interviews, or is it like people out in the conference doing just kind of walk up interviews, or a little of both, or what is that like?
It's both. The news division is doing 2 live shows a day, and those are more like studio shows with guests that are invited, interviewers, and they would, they would show some excerpts that they might have shot about these people. The one that is done in the morning is called The Late Show. The joke is being, some people stay out so late that the late show happens actually at 9 a.m. in the morning. And that is the hardest one to do because you tend to stay out late and there's a lot to do after hours. and the one at 6 p.m. Our 6 p.m. news is called the Dragon Con Update, the DCU. And so the Dragon Con is usually done out of studio, and the late show is done in one of the large panel rooms. So
Cool.
it has audience, and the other one is just a studio show, right? But there is a whole group that does exactly what you're saying. They're like run and gunning it around the show, shooting interesting things and interviewing people on location, and then bringing all that back. And they have a post production room where people sit and edit all of that material, do graphics, kind of do post production on this material, and they usually produce anywhere from like a dozen to a dozen and a half of 3 5-minute segments every year. The ones that they kind of shoot and produce Thursday and Friday, I get to use in that channel on Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and about a third of them gets finished late in the game. But it's usually content that I can reuse next year, and I just kind of rerun it from next year because some of these events are very interesting, but they happen later in the convention. There is like robot battles where people build robots
Mm-hmm.
that destroy each other, right? And that kind of happens towards the end of the convention. There is what's called night fights where people in armor are fighting each other with axes and swords and everything, and that thing goes for like 5 6 hours. And
Yeah.
so there's it's a little bit of insanity going on for 5 days. So you can, it's sort of an easy kind of an easy environment to find interesting things to shoot for. Like this year, of course, it was the year of the what they call the Barbieheimer, right? So a lot of the photo shoots were 200 people who showed up in a Barbie costume, or 40 guys who showed up dressed as Alan, right? So that kind of stories. But it's a nice environment. It's usually kind of younger folks
Mm-hmm.
who oftentimes are either thinking about the profession, right, or they are in film school at the time, and that's kind of that crew that does it. But like they do the scripts, they do like shot lists and everything. There's like editing that they do in post production. It's exactly what you would think of like a small TV studio, just like I mentioned.
I have to imagine that aside from being a lot of fun, if you're even remotely interested in this kind of stuff, that this would also be a great way of doing some volunteer work and having a way to build your resume up a little bit to maybe get into the industry. Because, I mean, there's plenty of evidence of what you do during those conferences between what you're talking about with Dragon Con TV and the stuff that gets posted on YouTube or Twitch or what have you. It's even people like me who don't go to the conferences have heard of these conferences for years and years and years. So it's not, there's some name recognition that goes with it too.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a thing. It's a great networking opportunity to kind of meet maybe not the industry people, but at the very least the like-minded people
Right.
who are in this. And Atlanta has a kind of a growing television / movie producing industry right now. So it's a lot easier right now to rent gear. It's a lot easier right now to like find locations and find people. Like one of the things that the guys do is we have an entire year to produce some comedy content, right? And it's usually like parody skits. They would do like a parody on advertising or parody on some kind of popular music with different words and different video in the background. And that all goes on that kind of video channel. But every year we get about 15 to 20 submitted clips that we usually end up picking about a dozen to air. And there's several groups of people who produce this content during the year. And this is like a full-fledged shoot and costume work and post-production and everything else. So there's a lot of overlap in people who do these things professionally or sometimes kind of doing this stuff on the side. But it's a great networking opportunity for a lot of people. And then we have many people who kind of come and they, honestly, it's not a very complex work. Like there's not any pre-qualification that would kind of get you excluded from that group. It's just the first year that you come in there, you might get a simpler job,
Hmm.
knowing that you like. First of all, there's training, right? They will
Right,
train you on
right.
doing anything, but like first year you're there, if you haven't ever done it, you might get a simpler job than if you've already done it. But a lot of people learn these skills that they then use, and I've had these conversations because a lot of them are coming back and forth. So they, for example, went from volunteering at Dragon Con TV to doing more for their church, for example, when they help with the streaming setup
Yeah,
that a lot of churches are now doing, right? And we actually have quite a good number of folks who come and do this work because they're familiar from
yeah,
doing it for their church or trying to run their own YouTube channel, and it kind of exposes them to a little bit more, not professional technology, but at least like a prosumer level of
yeah.
how would you do a streaming setup if it was not just you with your webcam and
I
and
was
your
just thinking
screen, but
certainly
a
a
little
different
bit.
scale.
Right. It's a little bit higher scale. So it's not really a real TV station, but it's kind of very close to a real one that you can go and experience for a couple of days and see how things work.
That's
I
really
would
cool.
highly recommend it. Like if you're interested in television, right? If you're interested in broadcasting at all or in film, it's a nice way to kind of spend your convention, especially if you're going to a convention. Which is how it starts pretty much for everybody. You show up for the convention, you like it, and then you're kind of thinking, well, am I going to continue being a guest, right, or am I going to help host this party? And that was my progression, right? I was like, I like hosting parties, and this is probably the biggest party that I get to host in my life, right?
I
This
would
is
imagine so.
you get 80,000 people showing up, and you're making sure that they're all having a great time. That's very rewarding, not just in things that you learn, but in terms of that, it's meaningful for a lot of people, way more meaningful than you would think, because it creates a kind of a safe space for a lot of people for a few days, that a lot of them may not have this safe space experience during the rest of their year, and that kind of shows because how devoted they are to this kind of culture and
Hmm.
showing up every year and
Yeah,
whatnot, and being part of the organization that provides it to them is incredibly rewarding.
I
Incredibly
bet.
rewarding.
So to kind of wrap us up, if someone's listening to this and says, that sounds pretty interesting, how would they go about finding out how to get involved or, maybe looking at volunteering at one of these events?
We had a joke. One of my volunteer kind of had a really witty answer when we all started kind of sharing stories. How did you end up here? Right. So his story was, I clicked the wrong link. Right. So the wrong link to click to end up there is either dragoncon.org or momocon.com. Both websites have a kind of a volunteer section that will point you out to more information of what's required from you and what are the benefits of volunteering and all that. And the time to I don't know, Gene, when this is going to come out, but the time to kind of sign up for volunteering for MomoCon, which is in Memorial Day weekend in May, right, is probably going to be in like a couple of weeks.
Okay.
So we usually start around New Year's with that one.
Yeah, so this will be out by then. This one will be
Yeah.
out December 1st of 2023.
Okay. Okay. So this is like just keep track of that, because Dragon Con is probably going to start the recruiting process and around February, March
Okay.
process. But then you sign up. You will have to kind of provide your details, because there's like both organizations actually have a background check,
Yeah,
because it's both kind of family friendly events with a lot of underage people, and they're
and
trying
that's
they're
pretty
trying to.
standard fare for any decent sized conference
Yeah,
and
at that
volunteer
level.
organization.
At that level, that's kind of pretty standard. Like I said, a lot of the divisions in the organization that need help will be happy to take you if you have a specific set of skills, and vice versa if you would rather not use the specific set of skills that you have and go try at doing something completely different. Like I joke with my director that, the moment I get tired doing Dragon Con TV, I'm going to go and do the art show, which is like, this is where, one of my favorite places at Dragon Con is the art show, where we've got a lot of visiting artists and so on.
Very
So
cool.
my 1 year I might doing that, but bottom line is, everywhere where you need skills, there's a training curriculum. It's like, it's not the first time these people are doing it, right?
Yeah.
This is kind of an established process.
We'll be sure and link to both of those in the show notes to make it easy for people to find them also.
Absolutely. I can give you those links. And then, in the application, you just kind of loosely tell about yourself, what you would like to be doing, and pick a few divisions in the organization that you would want to work in. And that's kind of how it all starts. Now you have the wrong link to click.
If someone was interested in reaching out to you to maybe follow up on something, is there a preferred way you would have them do that?
My email is dtarassenko with 2 S's at gmail.com.
Okay. And I'll be sure to include that in the show notes too, to make it easy for people.
Absolutely, yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you very much for your time, Dimitri. And that's really interesting to hear about. It's just the idea of basically a city popping up for 5 days and having a volunteer organization that's bigger than any of the companies I've worked for is pretty fascinating. So that's pretty cool. Well, thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jim. Mm-hmm.
Before we go, I'd like to thank those of you who have boosted in support for the show. It is very much appreciated. This is a value for value podcast, which means I rely on listeners like yourself contributing back to fund it. As such, I'll never charge you to listen, but producing and hosting it does cost money. If you got value from this episode, I ask that you contribute by sending a boost through a modern podcast app like Fountain or Cast-O-Matic, or via the Support the Show link in the show notes that are visible in your podcast app. You can also find the show notes and transcripts at volunteertechnologist.com. If you would like to come on the show or know someone I should reach out to about being on the show, please send me a message via one of the links at the bottom of the show notes. Thanks for listening.